Anthony Petrielli, Maple Leaf Hot Stove. He does great work over there. I try to remember to read him on Mondays, so you should do the same. What's up, Anthony? How we doing, buddy?
I'm good. How about you?
I'm well. I lost all my bets this weekend, so that part sucked. I got absolutely cratered in football yesterday. It was a day that I have not been familiar with as of late because I've been red hot, and it was a reminder of like, oh right, this is how this is supposed to go. Damn it. Okay,
it was a tough scheduling last night with the Leafs at 5:00. That was about as poorly done as it's been in a while.
Yeah, that's especially across from two hyper meaningful games in the NFL, like two of the better games that we got on a loaded calendar. But yeah, I don't know. I go back between whether I'd prefer the Leafs on Friday nights, which they've got this week, or the Sunday afternoon game. Both are just nightmares. One a weekend, Leafs. One a weekend. Saturday night. That's all you get. That's all you should ever get. Okay, so let's start with this. Felt really weirdly important for them to have that stretch in the second period where they just all of a sudden started pumping goals past Levi. How did it feel to you?
It was interesting in that they really weren't playing that well. I mean, they were getting outshot when they were down 3-1, right?
Like it was like 15-10. They were like they hadn't. I don't think they had registered more than 2 shots in that period.
Yeah, and so you're kind of watching going, well, they have 3 and 15, and I don't know if a single one would have gone in on Wool or Stellaris, but here you are, and it's not exactly like you're running play otherwise where you can just take comfort in the overall process that's taking place to get to that point on their end. It's not like you could say, well, the Leafs are dominating, and it's just Dennis Hildeby. You're watching it going, okay, Hildeby's not helping, but the team's not helping either. So there seemed to be something just in that, one, like feel good about yourself, put the puck in the net. Obviously, you mentioned Max Domi, and I know he scored earlier in the game, but then they got rolling. They get a power play goal. Things kind of come together. So I don't want to make too much of it. I mean, it's a Sunday in December against Buffalo, but it felt important just in that it's good to kind of get the buzzer going and watch the puck go in the net for your team. And really the big thing was having a third line that actually kind of set the pace for it, which was kind of wild. Like once they scored the second goal, watching it live, I thought to myself, there's no way they're wasting a 2-goal effort from the third line. Like there's no chance their top 6 is getting shut out this game. So like they're probably winning now, but it was nice that the third line kind of sparked it.
Yeah, the thing for me is not so much like, hey, blowing that out of import in terms of, hey, look how good they responded and they did. It's more so that it was like you put it against everything that they've been doing lately. Like this has not been a 1-game blip, right? These are the ones where normally if it's 1 game, you just kind of throw it away. But it's not. It's after a Detroit game that they lost and they didn't look like the better team for large stretches of the game. It's against, this stretch of play where they've felt like they've been papering over problems with really good goaltending, and then they don't have a great goaltender in there, and you're like, oh, wait, is this just what it looks like every single night? Is this kind of what we've been watching? And I kind of got the sense of like, it's not – it was a departure in the sense that they were playing especially poor, especially to start that second period, but I didn't get the sense of like that it was that far off.
Yeah, it was – I kind of had that same thought too in terms of, oh, well, they don't have a goalie playing lights out in front. And now, going into the game, I thought, well, maybe, you lose game Saturday, you have the backup in, or, it's the third stringer technically, and maybe you buckle down defensively and actually kind of flip the script. So the fact that didn't really happen for half the game, it was a little bit noteworthy. And I mean, they're not starting games very well at all right now. I think that's been like a 2-week run of just really poor starts, and it's almost always shift one, lose the face off, puck goes in deep, the other team starts hemming you in, and then they just can't seem to break it. And so, their goaltending is papering over some of these issues that they've been having lately. And they, I think throughout this entire core's tenure, they just kind of dipped their toe into the water of games. They never really come out and, set the proverbial tone or dictate play or kind of push how things are going to go along. It's kind of, well, let's see if we get through the 10 minutes and then we'll slowly start to get going from there. But the problem is when you play better hockey teams, they don't give you 10 minutes, right? Even the Boston Bruins, who, I don't know if I want to say they're reeling, but they're definitely not as good as they have been. They still come out with something to start a game, or as we saw last year in the playoffs, or when they played Florida this year, and Florida comes in on the 4-game losing streak, and it was like first shift, Tkachuk runs McMahon, they take a penalty, they kill it off clean, Tkachuk runs someone else, and you're off to the races in that game. So yeah, they need to sort that out. And then, yeah, to your point of the overall game, it just didn't feel good for about half of it. And then once they got rolling, it kind of turned, and they were great after that, but too long to get there.
Dude, this is one of the things, I'm glad you nailed it, or you touched on it, because I've got it in my notes, and I've got it, and it's something that I would have really hit on had I done Leafs talk last night. They're slow starters. And this is the joke, right, with Babcock, is start on time. And what did you just say? They dip their toe into games? Like, yeah, that continues to be a thing. You're playing a desperate Sabres team after a loss. I want to see you come out and try to put it away immediately, and that wasn't the case. And so, yeah, you kind of get the job done. But to me, it's almost like more worrying that you do it that way because it validates the poor behavior. And I think that it's pretty – you can say this about the Toronto Maple Leafs this year. They are a team where they start slow. Like, period. And it's a team that has done that year over year. It's been a problem for them. And when people have their takes of like, hey, I get it. It's a fundamentally, it's an argument that everyone's exasperated on, the whole like, hey, can you win with the core four thing? And what do you do moving forward? And this year, of course, it gets complicated as it always does by the issue of the guy that's up for the contract is the one that's playing the best, which just seems to happen somehow every single time. That it's like, okay, well, if you are making the case about changing things up and removing certain talent, it's like because you're searching for things that are pattern breakers. And this one drives me crazy, where it's like, okay, you lower yourself to your competition, which they've done multiple times over the stretch, whether it's been the Blackhawks game, whether it's been this one. Really, the only quality game they played was against the Ducks, but it wasn't anything of like, that's nothing to write home about. You beat the Ducks, you outplayed the Ducks, congratulations. But like, I thought that this was a pretty telling quote from Jake McCabe. And this was before the game, by the way. This was before the game, should be noted. He said, quote, "We're just looking for a good 60 minutes. We haven't really put together a 60-minute hockey game in a while that we've been proud of," end quote. So it's like, yeah, well, when you try to go do that is against a terrible Buffalo Sabres team, and it took you a period and a half to get into it. And so that's something where I look at it, it's like, okay, you've got the new coach. He's supposed to be a different kind of motivator for you. So then what is the issue? Like, why can't you just start these hockey games with that kind of force that you mentioned, which Florida came out with when they lost 4 games in a row?
Yeah, and I think, too, we can kind of pull back to the Detroit game, right? Like, not just Buffalo. I mean, the Buffalo game they won, of course, and they ended up turning it around. But Detroit was a similar situation, reeling team, playing really poorly.
Horrible goalie.
Dylan Larkin calling them out. I mean, Billy Husso hadn't won since December 2023 in the NHL before that. So, that another good example of like, why not just come out and make your life easier? These are fragile teams that you're playing. Mm-hmm. And if you come out and have a good 15 minutes, you probably aren't going to have to actually work that hard in the final 20 because they're probably going to already fold up shop. And you just make your life so much easier by having a really good start and just, blowing them out of the water before they even have thoughts of making it a game. And those are two teams that at this point of where they're at in the season and how they've played are vulnerable to really just lying down as the game goes along, as their fan bases have noted. So the interesting part of the whole thing is you play Sheldon Keefe's New Jersey Devils, and they come out and they have an excellent start to their game against the Leafs. And so I can't help but watch that and go, okay, well, obviously there's something in the water in the room. And I don't think that their top guys necessarily grasp what's required of having a strong start in a game in most cases, which is generally speaking, it's getting the puck in deep. It's getting your body on somebody else's body. It's putting some energy into the building or the bench or, your line mate and, just generating some shot volume, some traffic. And it's not necessarily coming out and scoring like 2-3 beautiful goals. Of course, everyone wants that start, but you can't do that on a consistent basis. Like you can't rely on just scoring to have a hot start. It's got to just be, let's control play. Let's aggressively get after them. Let's, get our legs going in this game. And they don't come out like that, right? And so this like heavy forecheck style kind of play. And, you would think as they mature along that they kind of see that. And, we talked about that Florida game. They come into that game on the losing streak, and you could see it with Matthew Tkachuk on the other side, right? He's going puck in deep. I'm running the first guy that I see touch the puck. And I'm just going to kind of set the tone for our team and get us rolling that way. And they were physical. Aaron Ekblad threw a big hit. Like you just kind of go down the lineup of their guys, and it's like exactly what they did. It's exactly how they've played in the playoffs the last 2 years. Jersey, not necessarily a physical team, but aggressive on the forecheck. They controlled the play against the Leafs. If you want to kind of look at other good teams, Carolina, same thing. Like they'll just get pucks in deep, aggressive on the forecheck. They'll work you and then just sort of build momentum off of having offensive zone shifts. Like they don't look to do that as part of the process of the game. I feel it's like, did they score? Great. If not much else is happening. And they just sort of waddle their way into the game.
Yeah, well, this is especially frustrating given that this is the mandate of the coaching staff. Like what you just outlined is what they want the team to do. And when people do hey, well, this guy doesn't fit the system stuff, first of all, I usually go, I think you're just saying that. I don't think that there's actually things that you're pointing to. I think that that's usually just an easy thing for people to say. But there are two things with it, which is like, okay, so guys who are more East-West players are not supposed to benefit as much. And I think that we've seen some of that with the likes of the Max Domis. But also, if you are supposed to be that team, this is actually, I'm reluctant to even talk about this because it's so overdone, the whole, like, does the core four thing work for you? But the one thing about them that has always kind of bothered me is what you're talking about there, where you're going, okay, get pucks in deep, have a body on a body. They've never really had a guy that has just consistently done that for them who has been a stud. And you've seen, that's why Matthew Knies feels so important, is because he is someone that does that more frequently. We understand that Matthews is a good defensive player and Marner is a good defensive player and that they don't hit, but they turn guys over in other ways, blah, 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 go on down the line. They don't have the mix-up in terms of style of play within the top four guys, where one of them is the physical tone setter. They're all the tone setter through essentially the same thing, which is playmaking and scoring. And so, yeah, Knies' import shouldn't feel that way as like a 23-year-old guy who has not been long established in the league. It's always felt like they've missed the Hyman piece of it, where it's like the one guy who gives that consistent in deep, hit you, dig around the net, play super physical, and make sure that the other guys can kind of follow suit into the game.
Yeah, it's something that they just don't get on a consistent basis. And, as much as we say system, like anyone can put a puck in a corner and go work hard. Like you don't have to run someone and throw a massive hit, but like you got to work hard and win a forecheck or win a battle, like keep the puck in the offensive zone. We're not just necessarily talking about throwing a big hit to start a game, although of course that's nice, but just like dominate play.
Yeah.
Like, get a puck in and dominate play. And the reality is when games start, there's usually a bit of a feeling out process through the neutral zone, right? You don't usually see, especially with the way the Leafs are playing now, they're definitely not going to open things up through the neutral zone where you're trading chances or you're creating anything off the rush. It's usually a pretty packed, tight spot. So you're almost forced, like Craig Berube or not, you're pretty well forced to put a puck in deep and go forecheck and get it, because games are starting in a fairly static manner where teams are just going to load up at center ice, and you're not going to start by getting a 3-on-2 out of nowhere unless there's a bad pinch or something of that, ilk, like of a bad breakdown. So you're basically required at that point to get a puck in deep and go get it. And they're just not like they're just not doing it consistently at this point, and it's been really exasperated, I think, over the past few weeks, where really the only game where I think you could kind of look and say that they did that is actually the game against Detroit, where they did, like the first line did have a good first shift, and then there was a penalty almost like right away, and their penalty kill is actually good, and they seem to get momentum off of having a good penalty kill to start the game, and they did string together a decent start, but it's been far too rare. And then Buffalo, they take a penalty right away again, and this time they give up a goal. So yeah, I think it's something they got to sort. It's tough. You don't want to always look and circle everything back to the playoffs, especially December and November. Like, we're 31 games in hockey.
It's hard not to, though, with this group. That's the byproduct of what happens when you struggle this many times over and over in the playoffs, right? Like,
and how many games have you sat there and watched, or you kind of go in and it feels like there should be a little extra juice into the playoff game, and then they just get a start where they get completely buried in their zone, and you're going, what's going on?
No, I'm with you. And I'll say this too. It's the reason why I think, talking this out with you right now, it's kind of especially concerning when they do have those slow starts and they don't play that way, is that they don't really have the other ways to beat you. Like, this is not a fast team that is going to burn you off the rush, right? That like is a big counterattack team. That's not what they do well. Okay, so remove that. They don't have a ton of depth scoring where they can lean down the lineup and get it in other places. And yeah, they're not a great breakout team either. So what do you got to do? You've got to get pucks in deep and then be able to work hard in the zone and create offense for yourself. And that's when they've looked good. That's when again, in the Detroit game, there were a few moments I thought, hey, the top line looks really good. Why? Because they were creating opportunities off of the cycle. And you're like, yeah, that's, people will say it's like the old way that the Leafs have not in past iterations been like what the expectation was, but it kind of has to be the expectation now. And in defense, and I'll bounce back between some of the like positive, negative stuff, just so it doesn't end up being like running them for, 30 plus minutes, is that sometimes I do wonder with the slow starts, how much of that is a byproduct of the lack of depth, that these guys are like conserving themselves, knowing like, hey, I got to have something left in the tank for the third period because we're the only two lines that are going to provide any offense tonight. And so I thought it was kind of noticeable that they got energy in that game yesterday from seeing depth scoring, right? That all of a sudden another line goes and then boom, 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 they start to stack momentum in that stretch of play. And it was like a reminder of, hey, this would be pretty useful if you could get a third line that every once in a while can pick you up in a bad hockey game. They end up not getting sympathy for it because they're the creators of that, right? Like, the reason why the Leafs don't have depth is because the Stars command the most amount of money. These two things are directly connected. That being said, did you see anything with that third line yesterday that you thought was sustainable versus just being like, hey, this is the Buffalo Sabres on in a team that has blown multiple leads during a 10 game winless streak?
Yeah, I mean, most importantly, it's the Buffalo Sabres, and you're getting easier matchups by way of their lack of depth, and that's why a team that's won, they're winless in their last 10. That said, it did remind me of last year, which was roughly around this time. It was a little bit earlier, but basically the Leafs were in the exact same situation where they weren't getting anything from their bottom six, and they put together this sort of makeshift at the time Robertson, Domi, Yarncroc line. I'm sure you remember it. They weren't anything crazy, but they won their minutes. They won them like 12-8 at 5-on-5. Nothing to write home about. Obviously, it wasn't the line as the season went along, but there was a point mid-season where they gave the Leafs what they needed in terms of a third line that could legitimately do something. Like, you have to be good at something one way or the other. Either you're really good defensively and you open the game up for Matthews and Marner, or you chip in offensively and get the odd goal, which is what I think this line is now with McMahon in place of Yarncroc. So I think there's something there where you can look and say that's a line that can chip in some offense and get them the odd goal. And, the reality is, it kind of funny because I was thinking about it when you were talking about, guys talk about can players fit in Berube's system and so on and so forth. And I've seen that come up as well, that thought of, oh, well, the top guys just aren't getting it. And I'm like, why not? Marner is having a career year. Like, he's pacing to have a career year points-wise. Nylander is pacing to score career high in goals. Matthews has been hurt. Tavares is having a great year. Like, he looks much better than he did last season, right? Like, the top guys have been just fine. Nyes is breaking out. Pacioretty's been a good fit. Like, what's the issue been? It's like none of these guys, no one else has done anything.
Yeah, it's a totally made up argument. I've heard it many times too, and I'm always like, where? Like, what exactly is it? And the other part that is, it's the other guys haven't done anything, but it's also that they have not been particularly great on the power play. And so that exasperates it because you're like, okay, these guys are supposed to kind of impose. And when you're a low-scoring hockey team, right? Like, you're not just taking advantage of teams 5-on-5 and you're grinding them out. I think there's supposed to be an implication with these guys that when you get the power play, you're supposed to cave teams in and make it feel like they're sick to their stomachs, knowing that they just changed the course of the game.
Yeah. The power play just has been a huge problem. So, I think in saying all that, I think there's enough there. I know, I heard you talking about Bobby McMahon before I hopped on.
That's the big thing to me.
Like he's a player, right? Yep. Like, that Yarncroc, Domi, Robertson line was decent last year for what they needed it to be. I can't fathom that, swapping Yarncroc for McMahon is going to make it worse.
No, I really, kind of where I was going with that take is, I think that the real difference, and God, you really shouldn't be relying on an injury-prone guy this much down your life, but it's like, it does show you that if you hit on a talented player on a cheap contract, what it can do for this team. It's been the story with Nyes. It's been the story with Pacioretty to a certain degree, where it's like, oh, right, this guy's a professional. He's able to do things that some of the other AHL stuck between guys that they've brought up here in past iterations has not been able to do, which is like, okay, yeah, like, he gets an opportunity in the front of the net, he's going to be able to bury it. All right, he's going to get an opportunity to hit somebody, he's going to hit somebody. He's a pro. Like, he walks, talks, acts like a pro and plays like a older pro. But McMahon, to me, is actually really fascinating because yesterday was I think out of the first time that I can remember anyways, where he was down the lineup and it felt like he was really like an imposing figure in the game. And you said it, that it's the Sabres, so I'm being patient with it, but he's just looked really good all season long. And it's been now with multiple different sets of players. I'm very curious to kind of see how his season plays out. And yes, of course, if he can stay healthy, but if he does stay healthy, what exactly a full season of him looks like.
Yeah, and I think Domi's a good fit for him. I know we've seen McMahon move up the lineup with Matthews and Marner for like the very odd look. And I think he looks pretty good with Nylander because Nylander just dominates the puck so much, and then he'll just dish it on occasion. And McMahon has a really good shot, and, his speed helps create turnovers on the forecheck and these sorts of things. But I think the fit is a bit awkward with Matthews and Marner because McMahon's not really like a playmaker. Like, he's not going to move the puck with those guys.
And he doesn't hit.
Right? Yeah. So that combo is a little bit strange, but I think with Domi, it works quite well because Domi does like the puck on his stick, and Domi is going to pass 9 times out of 10, maybe even the full 10, maybe even 11 out of 10. So, having McMahon as a trigger man around him makes sense. Having McMahon as a bit of more of a defensive conscious and someone who can just get the puck out of their zone when that's required on that side of things makes sense. And also just the size of having that forechecker and, a little bit of a different element than Yarncroc, where McMahon doesn't necessarily need to look for space. He can just create it himself. So that works. And then we've kind of seen it with, like, as McMahon will be the bigger story, I think, for the overall picture of their season, because I think they do need to get something from him in the playoffs, just as that, another big power forward type left winger in their group. But I think how viable that line is for the time being is probably going to go back to Robertson. Like, they need to get something from him, right? Like, he needs to, if he's contributing every, couple games, the way, I don't want to say the way he did last year, because it wasn't, because he was constantly getting scratched in and out of that. But, if he could just do that consistently, then you probably have a third scoring line. If it's, Robertson's about to not get a point again for 11 games, you're going to have a problem with that third line. And it's not been for a lack of chances on his end. He's had tons of chances, and they just haven't gone in. So maybe he's due, or maybe that's just reality catching up to him. I don't know.
I'm already decided on it. I can't do it anymore, especially given the amount of opportunities that have taken place and the length in which he's been allowed to struggle, especially this year. It's like the guy in a tough physical matchup against a hard team is not going to be able to stay on his skates. He fumbles too many pucks. And as nice as the shot is, he's not an elite enough finisher to justify the other warts to the game. And for this team, right now in this very stretch of play where they're searching for for goal scoring, great. You want to get more from him. But come deadline time, come when this team is trying to make their additions and move forward, you can't come out of the trade deadline and have Nick Robertson in your lineup. Not even as a guy who's essentially rotating in. You got to have other pieces there that are ensuring that is not what you're doing moving forward here. He's not a fit. He's had his run. Every once in a while, he's going to pop, and you're going to go, wow, because he does a lot. He's little short bursts, and when he has his moments, he looks great. But overall, the body of work is pretty conclusive for me, and it really doesn't need to. There really doesn't need to be more referendums every single time he puts one of these together, which is again once now every 12 to 13 games. Yeah, I think I mean, they're going to add forward. I think that's. I think they're going to need to add clear. Two. Yeah, I agree. Right, so they're going to have to add. They're going to definitely add at least one. Yep. I would probably try to add two, depending on how you can swing it, and all that comes with that. But in the meantime of that line being viable, it's probably only going to be viable if he's able to chip in and Domi and McMahon are pretty good players, but they can't play with a guy who's going to do nothing. Yeah. And we can't expect much out of them. And that, it's like if you swap him for Pontus Holmberg, it's like, okay, another guy who could go pointless in 20 games without, with time stand still. Yeah, the layer right underneath all the guys that matter to this team is just so dreadful that it's just not. You can't take a hardline position of I think Robertson should be in, or I think Holmberg should be in, or I think it's just it's all the same. It's just really all the same. That's why people got so excited with Gurbankin for a bit, because they were like, oh, he's moving around, he's doing something. Then you watch him for a few and you go oh, okay, he's just right now where he's at in his development track. It's all the same, where you're just not getting anything out of these guys. And that's what I was kind of mentioning about why I give them a little bit of that forgiveness, that little bit of reprieve with the slow start stuff, is because I'm like, okay, they have to be marathon runners. They come out and they gas in the first, they push all in there. They know that it's there's nothing behind them that is going to be giving them a lift later in the hockey game. Okay, I want to move to a couple of other things before we let you go here. One is, I think that it's been a little underrated from a storyline somehow in this market, that the D pairings have been shuffled as much as they have been lately, and some of it's been the McCabe injury, right? So they remove him from the lineup, and it really put him in flux, because the one thing that they really had was this lockdown pairing with McCabe and with Tanev. The thing is that when McCabe and Tanev are together, the other pairings, especially in the middle, they don't work as well. And I'm curious what you think the ideal groupings are right now. I mean, with what they have, meaning the personnel that they have, and we'll just assume that fully healthy. Yanni Hakanpää, well, minus Yanni Hakanpää, I guess. Yeah, I can't do the Yanni Hakanpää as a part of it thing, because it's just, he's hurt again, and he came into. He lost a year off of his contract, didn't come to camp for a long time, is named to this Four Nations team, where you're like, okay, is he playing or is he there because of an injury? I think it would be great if he surprises people, but at this point he is he's a lottery ticket that maybe factors in. He's not like a core fundamental piece anymore. I think that's pretty well established, right? Yeah, no, I agree. I just want to make sure that we're not including him in it. Yeah. I'm not doing fantasy talk of and then if he was fully healthy, if he bounces back into what he's been in Dallas, you're for sure. Okay, I get it. It would be great if he did, but in the time being. But realistically, it's unlikely at this point, I would say. Yeah, and so as much as we'll talk about, the need to add a forward and probably two, to me, I think you almost have to look at the defense, say they might need to add a guy if unless he starts coming back in, January, February, plays in the Four Nations, somehow doesn't get hurt then, and starts rolling to the nth degree. Yeah.
the reality of their defense is they have one really good pairing and then two pairings that are struggling right now. And as much as I love the McCabe-Tanev pairing, and I think everybody does, I don't.
It's impossible
no one's
not to
argue otherwise.
Yeah. They're like analytically, they grade out to be the best defensive pairing in all of hockey so far this season. So it's like, yeah, you can't hate it.
The fit's great, lefty, righty. They're both excellent defensively. They both break the puck out. Mm-hmm. Their shifts are super clean. Everyone likes it. I'm well aware, myself included. But they're not good enough to keep them together. And the other side of that is those guys also don't play enough to justify it. It's not like you're saying McCabe and Tanev play 25 minutes a night.
Mm-hmm.
They play, like Tanev plays under 20 a night. And McCabe is averaging like 21. He's been a little bit over 20 since he's come back. Like, they don't play enough of the game where you can say, come hell or high water, I'm going to pair them up. And we'll work around it, but that's fine because they're just so dominant on the ice and they play so much of the game. They don't play enough of the game to me, and that's fine. I don't think they're built like that. They're not. This isn't Cale Makar, and you're saying skate around freely, and the game comes so natural to you. Like, McCabe and Tanev play tough, physical, wear you down minutes at all times. Like, that's their game, and that's what makes both of them such excellent players. So, to me, you have to, like, sadly, you have to split them, and then you have to just look for opportunities and high leverage situations where you would put them back together, to close a period, to take a D-zone draw against the top line, things of this nature, obviously the penalty kill. But I think over the flow of the game, and you saw it last night against Buffalo, right? Like, they started splitting them up. Tanev was taking shifts with Riley, he's taking shifts with Ekman-Larsson. We saw McCabe go back with old friend Simon Benoit. To me, I'd probably go back to what they started the season with, which was Riley with Tanev and Ekman-Larsson with McCabe. It moves McCabe back on the right, which is unfortunate, but he is really good there. And, the third pairing is a tough one, just given their options. I would still rate Timmins ahead of Myers. I don't know if I've seen Myers make a clean breakout pass on someone, like on another Leafs forwards tape yet.
No, Myers to me is very much like the quad A AHL guys that Dubas would run out there time and time again, and that they have in their forward group, where you're like, yeah, okay, he's defensive Pontus Holmberg kind of player, where it's like, okay, how many minutes did he play tonight? Well, didn't really notice too many things that he did, unless it's a mistake, and I haven't seen the clean break. Like, yeah, he's not a guy. To me, this is actually, I know I told you I'm not doing fantasy lineup stuff, but ultimately, you've got a pretty simple situation in front of you. You want the Tanev-McCabe pairing to be something that you do lean on for over 20 minutes come playoff time. I'm fine that they don't lean on it now, but even when you're talking about it, like, think about how many shots the Tanev blocks a game. Like, he just had a game where he didn't block a shot for the first time in his entire career, essentially, right? So all of a sudden you're adding even 3 minutes. How many more block shots is that for Chris Tanev? How do you feel as a Leaf fan when you see Chris Tanev block a shot and there's that moment where he's on the bench and you're wondering, right? You're wondering if that's the one that got him. They're too physical and they're too old for you to just like lean on them for an 82-game regular season and be pressing the pedal to the floor. But come playoff time, that has to be the mix. Also, OEL's got to be down on your third pairing, and then Morgan Rielly just needs a different righty shot. You saw that that's what they want to do, because they put Hakanpää like fresh in the lineup with Morgan Rielly, and they said, we really hope this works. And then Hakanpää moved exactly like you expected a guy with no knee cartilage who hadn't played an entire hockey season to move around, which was extremely poorly. To me, I think the ideal pairings ultimately are going to end up being that top pairing, Morgan Rielly with insert right shot D that is capable, which McKee and I have joked about a lot now, should just be Luke Shen. Just go get Luke Shen. It worked. He's not materially different than what he was when he was here. And then have a third pairing that is essentially OEL with Timmins, with potentially the ability to mix in a Hakanpää or a Myers if you feel like he's not going for a playoff matchup. And then unfortunately, Ben was on the outside looking in, but that's fine because he's a good depth piece to have as your seventh or eighth guy.
Yeah, I would agree. I would like to see, as much as I don't like Ekman-Larsson on the right, I would be curious about it in like 17 minutes a night with Benoit, just because I do like at times what Benoit brings physically. Like if they're playing Florida, I probably want Benoit in that series over Tanev, or sorry, not over Tanev, over Ekman over Timmins.
Over Timmins.
I lose my mind.
I agree. It's just that when we've seen OEL play on his like offside,
it's been bad. It's been really
exactly.
bad.
It's like that's when. Like, you look at earlier portion of the season when people are like, look at this guy. He can break the puck out and he plays with some physicality. And, wow, maybe the Leafs really hit on something here. And then you heard other people around hockey going, hey, this is going to wear off a little bit. And this is sort of what Florida went through last year where they limited it. And then they got to the postseason. He was really effective. I like him as a player. I just don't like him being with Morgan Rielly playing heavy minutes where he's not playing his correctly slotted spot. It feels like he loses just about every piece of his game outside of the chippiness whenever he gets an opportunity around the net.
Yeah, and the reality, just for context for listeners, I mean, they're getting greased up with really soft offensive zone starts, like they're over 60%, and they're getting outscored at 5-on-5.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's just, they're setting them up for offensive success. And not only are they not producing offensively, but they are actively getting scored on.
Yeah.
In their own end.
Say what you will about Timothy
on
Liljegren. That's what they did for him, but he still was able to get the good numbers.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there's something to be said for it, right? So it's hard to understate just how poor that pairing has been. And I mean, you look at Rielly as well, not to make it a dumping session on the defense. Like, Rielly is pacing to have one of the lowest point producing seasons of his career right now, right? Like, it just has not been overly productive. I don't think that that's Ekman Larsson's fault per se, but I don't think that pairing has gelled in any meaningful sort of way. And we really just haven't seen Rielly activated too much offensively in general, right? Like there's not much that sticks out in terms of Rielly joining the play as like a fourth forward type of player, as like a backside drop pass option, or, anything that's overly, more than them cycling the puck to him on the point and him trying to put a shot through. Like, there hasn't been a ton there. So yeah, like, they got to find a way to activate him a little bit more. And to your point about right-handed defensemen, stay-at-home types, that's usually when he's been at his best at doing it and feeling the most comfortable to do it. So, like, there's a benefit there. And the way that they're playing is they need offense from the point. Like, that is a key piece of what they're trying to do. It's like, let's spend a bunch of time in the offensive zone and grind them down and put pucks to the point and get traffic in front. Like, Rielly, to me, still probably is their best option in terms of a guy who can just get shots through traffic into the net. So they got to find a way to get him there. I agree. Like, you go into the playoffs, you want the McCabe-Tanev pairing to be a thing. I don't know if you can do it right now. So I'd all game. And so I'd probably move things around and just give yourself some different options in your back pocket come playoff time in general, just knowing you can go back to McCabe-Tanev whenever you want. But yeah, right now on the whole, it's tough. Like, that's probably been the biggest thing for me in this overall run of play, just kind of watching it going, I think the forwards will be okay. I don't know about the power play in the playoffs, but I think the power play will kind of round itself out as the season goes along. We're starting to see that. I think their goaltending is full marks, but their defense and just like their ability to break pucks out clean and to stop cycles, McCabe and Tanev aren't on. They're having a really tough go.
You got to call him later today?
Pardon me?
You got to call him coming out later today?
Yes. Yeah, I got one. It might be a two-parter because it ended up being quite lengthy, but yeah.
Okay. All right.
It's
well, there you go. So go read Anthony's work. It's always great. Hey, buddy, thanks as always for doing it, and we'll chat with soon.
Thanks for having me on, JD.
See you, buddy.